The boy was barefoot. His clothes were torn at the sleeves, stained with dirt that had settled into the fabric like it belonged there. His small hands were cupped together, extended toward strangers who walked past without looking. His eyes were hollow, not from hunger alone, but from something deeper. Something that happens to a child when the world forgets they exist. And standing just 20 feet away, frozen in the middle of that dusty street, was one of the wealthiest men in the country. His heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat. Because the child begging for coins on that cracked sidewalk was not a stranger. That boy, with the matted hair and the bruised knees and the look of someone who had stopped expecting anything good, was his son, his own flesh and blood. The child he believed was safe. The child he thought was loved. The child he had failed in ways he was only now beginning to understand. He had searched boardrooms. He had conquered industries. He had built towers that touched the sky and commanded rooms filled with the most powerful people in the nation. But never in his darkest nightmares did he imagine this moment. Never once did he picture himself standing in the heat of a summer afternoon, watching his 8-year-old child sit on a filthy street corner, begging strangers just to survive another day. The world around him became a blur. The traffic noise faded. The people passing by disappeared. All that remained was his son, and the unbearable weight of everything he had ignored, everything he had assumed, and everything he had lost. What happened in the next few hours would tear open wounds he thought he had buried. It would expose secrets that had been hidden for years. It would test every belief he held about success, about family, and about what it truly means to be a father. And by the end of it, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. How does a billionaire's son end up begging on the street? Who allowed this to happen? Who hid this child from the man who was supposed to protect him? And why, when the boy finally opened his mouth to speak, did the most powerful man in the city fall to his knees and weep like he had never wept before? Was this punishment for years of absence? Was this betrayal from someone he trusted? Or was this simply the universe forcing him to confront the one truth he had spent his entire life running from? This is not a story about money. This is not a story about fame or power or success. This is a story about a father and a son, separated by circumstance, reunited by fate, and forever changed by the brutal, beautiful truth of what it means to love someone more than yourself. Stay with me, because nothing in this story is what it first appears to be, and the ending will stay with you long after the final words are spoken. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I would genuinely love to know who is part of this community and where you are joining us from today. And if you are new here, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share stories like this every week, stories that challenge the heart, inspire the soul, and remind us what truly matters in life. Do not miss what is coming next. Now let us continue. His name was David Mitchell, and if you had seen him 5 years ago, you would have seen a man who had everything. A net worth that climbed into the billions. A reputation that opened doors before he even knocked. A face that appeared on magazine covers and television interviews. He was the definition of American success. A self-made man who had risen from nothing and built an empire through discipline, intelligence, and relentless ambition. But behind the tailored suits and the polished speeches, there was a man who had forgotten how to feel. David was not cruel. He was not heartless. He was simply absent. Somewhere along the way, in the race to build his fortune, he had lost the ability to be present. He worked 18-hour days. He traveled constantly. He made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. But he could not remember the last time he had sat still long enough to ask someone how they were truly doing. His marriage to Grace had started with hope. She was warm where he was cold. She was patient where he was restless. She believed in love the way he believed in numbers, completely and without question. They met at a charity event when David was still climbing his way up. She was a teacher, idealistic and kind, and she saw something in him that no one else did. She saw the boy beneath the ambition, the one who grew up poor, the one who was terrified of going back. They married within a year, and for a while, it was beautiful. But success has a way of demanding everything, and David gave it everything. He gave it his mornings, his evenings, his weekends, and eventually, his marriage. Grace tried to hold on. She tried to remind him that money was not the only thing that mattered. But every conversation turned into an argument. Every dinner was interrupted by phone calls. Every vacation was canceled for a deal. And eventually, Grace stopped trying. The divorce was quiet but devastating. They did not scream at each other in courtrooms. They did not fight over assets. Grace asked for nothing except custody of their son, a boy named Ethan who was only 3 years old at the time. David agreed, not because he did not love his son, but because he believed Grace was the better parent. He told himself he would visit. He told himself he would stay involved. He told himself that sending money every month was the same as being there. But weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And slowly, without realizing it, David became a ghost in his own son's life. He sent birthday gifts. He made occasional phone calls. He transferred money into an account that he assumed was being used for Ethan's care. But he never showed up. He never sat beside his son at a school play. He never tucked him into bed or read him a story or asked him about his dreams. He convinced himself that providing was the same as loving. And that lie became the foundation of his entire existence. Grace, meanwhile, carried the weight of everything. She raised Ethan alone in a modest apartment far from the world of luxury David inhabited. She worked 2 jobs to give her son a sense of normalcy, even though David's money could have made things easier. She did not want Ethan to grow up entitled. She wanted him to understand the value of effort, of kindness, of showing up for the people you love. But life has a way of testing even the strongest people. And Grace was about to face a test she could not win. It started with fatigue, then headaches, then a diagnosis that shattered everything. Grace was sick, seriously sick. The kind of sick that does not care how good of a person you are or how much you have sacrificed. She told no one except her sister, and even then, she downplayed the severity. She did not want pity. She did not want David swooping in out of guilt. She wanted to fight this battle on her own terms. But the bills started piling up. The treatments drained her savings. And soon, Grace found herself making impossible choices. Food or medicine, rent or electricity. And through it all, she kept smiling for Ethan. She kept telling him that everything was going to be okay. She kept pretending that the world was not falling apart around them. She tried to reach David. She sent messages. She left voicemails. She even wrote letters. But something was wrong. Something was blocking her attempts. She did not know it at the time, but the man she had trusted to manage Ethan's support, a family friend named Ronald, had been intercepting everything. He had been stealing the money David sent. He had been deleting the messages. He had been lying to both of them, telling David that Grace wanted nothing to do with him, and telling Grace that David had stopped caring entirely. And so, in the final months of her life, Grace believed she had been abandoned. She believed that the father of her child had simply moved on, too busy with his empire to notice that his family was drowning. Let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover later that they were not who you thought they were? Have you ever looked back on a situation and realized that the truth was being hidden from you the entire time? Think about that as we continue. Because what happened next is something no parent should ever have to face. Grace passed away on a cold November morning. She was alone in her hospital bed. Ethan was at school, unaware that his mother was slipping away. Her sister arrived too late. And just like that, the only stable presence in that boy's life was gone. The days that followed were chaos. Grace's sister tried to take custody, but she was struggling herself, living paycheck to paycheck with 3 children of her own. Ronald, the so-called family friend, stepped in and offered to help. He convinced the courts that he could provide a stable home for Ethan while the family sorted things out. And for a brief moment, it seemed like the right decision. But Ronald was not a good man. The money he had stolen from David was running out. And now that Grace was gone, there was no one to protect Ethan from the truth of who Ronald really was. The abuse started slowly. Neglect at first, then harsh words, then worse. Ethan, a child who had already lost his mother, was now trapped in a home where he was treated like a burden. He was given scraps to eat. He was locked in his room for hours. He was told that no one was coming for him, that his father did not care, that he was alone in this world. And eventually, Ethan believed it. He stopped crying. He stopped asking for help. He simply survived, day by day, hour by hour, waiting for something he could not name. One night, after Ronald came home drunk and raised his hand, Ethan made a decision. He climbed out of his window, ran into the darkness, and did not stop running until he collapsed on the steps of an old church miles away. He was 7 years old. He had no money, no food, and no idea where to go. But he knew one thing for certain. He was never going back. The months that followed were a blur of survival. Ethan lived on the streets, moving from place to place, eating whatever he could find, sleeping wherever he could hide. Other homeless children taught him how to beg, how to avoid danger, how to disappear when the wrong kind of adults came looking. He learned to trust no one. He learned to expect nothing. And somewhere deep inside him, the boy who once believed in birthdays and bedtime stories and a father who might come home someday simply stopped existing. That boy was replaced by someone harder, someone quieter, someone who had learned, far too young, that the world does not care about you unless you make it care. And so, when David Mitchell's black car pulled up to that street corner on that dusty afternoon, Ethan did not feel hope. He did not feel relief. He felt fear, because the man stepping out of that car was not a savior. He was a stranger. And in Ethan's experience, strangers only ever wanted something. David approached slowly. His legs felt heavy, like he was walking through water. Every step brought him closer to a truth he was not ready to face. The boy looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. David saw it then. The shape of Grace's nose, the curve of his own mother's chin, the unmistakable echo of his own childhood, staring back at him from a face that should never have known this kind of suffering. He knelt down, his expensive pants pressing into the dirty pavement, and he whispered the only words he could manage. "Son, is it really you?" Ethan did not answer. He stared at David like he was looking at a ghost. Then, slowly, recognition flickered across his face. But instead of running into his father's arms, instead of crying with relief, Ethan did something that shattered David's heart into 1,000 pieces. He backed away. He shook his head, and he said, in a voice that was far too calm for an 8-year-old, "Please don't take me back. I'm safer here." David felt the world tilt beneath him. He did not understand. He could not understand. How could his son, his own child, be afraid of him? How could this boy, who should have been living in comfort, be standing here in rags, begging for coins, flinching at the sight of his own father? The crowd around them started to gather. Phones came out. People whispered. And David, for the first time in his adult life, did not care about his reputation. He did not care about the cameras or the gossip or the headlines that would surely follow. He only cared about the boy in front of him. The boy who was looking at him with eyes that held no trust, no warmth, no recognition of the love that should have been there all along. David reached out his hand, but Ethan stepped back again. And in that moment, David understood something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had not just lost his son. He had never truly had him. Now I want to pause here and ask you something. If you were in David's position, standing in front of a child who did not trust you, a child who had been through horrors you could not imagine, what would you do? Would you try to force a connection? Would you walk away? Would you fight for a relationship that might already be broken beyond repair? Think about that as we continue. Because what David did next is something very few people would have the courage to do. David did not grab Ethan. He did not demand answers. He did not try to fix everything in that single moment. Instead, he sat down, right there on the dirty street, in his $1,000 suit, surrounded by strangers with their phones out. David Mitchell sat on the pavement and said nothing. He simply waited. Minutes passed. Ethan watched him, confused, suspicious, waiting for the trick. But there was no trick. There was only a man, broken and desperate, trying to show his son that he was not a threat. Eventually, Ethan spoke. "Why are you here?" David swallowed hard. "I've been looking for you. For months. I didn't know. I didn't know any of this was happening." Ethan's face hardened. "Mom said you were too busy to love us." Those words hit David like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with tears. He admitted. "I was too busy, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." The conversation that followed was not easy. It was not a movie scene where everything is resolved with a hug and a swell of music. It was awkward. It was painful. It was filled with long silences and half-finished sentences and questions that neither of them knew how to answer. But it was real. And for the first time in years, David was fully present. He listened as Ethan told him about the months on the street. He listened as Ethan described the abuse, the fear, the loneliness. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix things, without offering money or solutions. He just listened. And when Ethan finally finished, exhausted and trembling, David said the only thing that mattered. "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. Not ever again. But words are easy. Trust is earned. And Ethan had no reason to believe that this man, this stranger who shared his blood, would be any different from everyone else who had failed him. So David did something unexpected. He did not take Ethan to his mansion. He did not surround him with luxury and expect gratitude. Instead, he asked Ethan where he wanted to go. Ethan pointed to a small shelter a few blocks away, a place where he had sometimes found food and warmth. And David, billionaire and business titan, walked with his son to that shelter and asked if they had room for two. The staff looked at him like he was crazy. But David did not care. He slept on a thin mattress that night, in a room that smelled like disinfectant and old blankets, beside a boy who still did not trust him. And for the first time in decades, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days that followed were slow. David did not push. He did not demand. He simply showed up. Every morning, he was there. Every meal, he was present. He learned that Ethan liked peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off. He learned that Ethan was terrified of thunderstorms. He learned that Ethan still whispered goodnight to his mother every evening, even though she could not hear him anymore. And with each small discovery, David felt the walls between them begin to crumble. It was not a dramatic transformation. It was 1,000 tiny moments, each one laying another brick in the foundation of something new. There were setbacks. There were nights when Ethan refused to speak. There were mornings when he looked at David with suspicion and asked if he was really going to stay. But David never wavered. He never gave up. And slowly, impossibly, something began to heal. I want to pause here one more time, because what I am about to tell you is the part of this story that still keeps me awake at night. It is the moment when David finally learned the full truth about what had happened to Grace. And I want you to brace yourself, because this is the part that breaks even the strongest hearts. David hired investigators. He needed to understand how everything had gone so wrong. And what they uncovered was almost too painful to believe. Grace had tried to contact him dozens of times. She had sent messages, left voicemails, written letters. She had begged for help, not for herself, but for Ethan. She had been dying, and all she wanted was for David to step in and protect their son. But Ronald had intercepted everything. Every message, every call, every desperate plea. He had responded in David's name, telling Grace that David wanted nothing to do with them. He had stolen the money meant for Ethan's care. He had lied to the courts. He had manipulated everyone involved. And when Grace finally passed away, Ronald had seen an opportunity to exploit a vulnerable child for whatever he could get. David sat in his office, reading the investigation report, and felt something inside him shatter. Grace had died believing he had abandoned her. She had spent her final days thinking that the father of her child did not care. She had whispered David's name with her last breath, hoping against hope that he would come. And he never did. That night, David visited Grace's grave for the first time. He stood there in the darkness, the cold wind cutting through his coat, and he wept. He wept for the woman he had loved and lost. He wept for the years he had wasted chasing things that did not matter. He wept for his son, who had suffered because of his absence. And he wept for himself, for the man he could have been, if only he had paid attention. He did not ask for forgiveness. He knew he did not deserve it. But he made a promise. Standing there in that cemetery, with the stars hidden behind clouds and the silence pressing down on him, David promised Grace that he would spend the rest of his life making things right. He would not fix the past. That was impossible. But he would build a future that honored her memory. He would become the father she always believed he could be. The months that followed were transformative. David did not return to his old life. He stepped back from his companies. He sold assets. He donated millions to organizations that helped homeless children. He started a foundation in Grace's name, dedicated to providing support for single parents facing impossible circumstances. But more importantly, he focused on Ethan. He enrolled him in therapy. He found a small house in a quiet neighborhood. He learned to cook, badly at first, but he kept trying. He attended school events. He helped with homework. He sat beside Ethan during thunderstorms and held his hand until the shaking stopped. He became, for the first time in his life, fully present. Ethan's trust came slowly. There were still hard days. There were still moments when the trauma of everything he had experienced rose to the surface and threatened to overwhelm him. But David was always there. Not with answers, not with solutions, but with presence. And over time, that presence became the foundation of something neither of them had expected. A real relationship. A real family. One afternoon, almost a year after that first encounter on the street, Ethan looked at David and said something that made all of it worthwhile. "Dad, I'm glad you found me." David pulled his son into a hug and held him close. And in that moment, he understood a truth that had taken him a lifetime to learn. Success is not measured in dollars or buildings or magazine covers. Success is measured in the moments we refuse to miss. The hugs we give, the conversations we have, the times we show up, even when it is hard, even when we are tired, even when we do not know the right thing to say. Ronald was eventually arrested. The investigation uncovered years of fraud, theft, and abuse. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. But David did not find satisfaction in that. Justice was important, but it did not bring Grace back. It did not erase the years of suffering. It did not undo the damage that had been done. All David could do was move forward, one day at a time, and try to be the father his son deserved. And that is exactly what he did. Now, as we near the end of this story, I want to leave you with something to think about. Because this is not just a story about David and Ethan. This is a story about all of us. It is a reminder that the things we chase, the success we pursue, the achievements we celebrate, none of it matters if we lose sight of the people who need us most. It is a reminder that presence is more valuable than presence. That showing up is more important than sending checks. That love is not proven by what we provide, but by the moments we choose to share. How many of us are guilty of the same thing David was? How many of us have let work consume us? How many of us have assumed that our loved ones know we care, without actually showing them? How many of us have missed birthdays, anniversaries, school plays, and quiet evenings, telling ourselves that we will make it up later? But later is not guaranteed. Later might never come. And the people we love might not be there when we finally decide to pay attention. So I ask you this. If you could go back to any moment in your life and choose to be more present, what moment would it be? Who would you hold a little closer? What would you say to someone you have been too busy to really see? Drop your answer in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And I hope this story has reminded you, as it has reminded me, that the greatest gift we can give anyone is our time. David and Ethan still have hard days. Healing is not a straight line, but they face those days together. They have breakfast together every morning. They talk about Grace, keeping her memory alive through stories and photographs and the little traditions she loved. They have built something real, not from wealth or power, but from patience and persistence and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. David still runs his foundation. He still visits shelters. He still mentors children who remind him of what Ethan went through. But his priorities are different now. He knows what matters. And he never forgets. A father did not save a child. A child saved a father. And in the end, they saved each other. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with a parent who might be working too hard. Share it with a friend who has been distant. Share it with anyone who needs a reminder that it is never too late to show up for the people we love. And if you want to see more stories like this, subscribe to this channel. We are building a community here, a family of people who believe in the power of storytelling to change hearts and inspire action. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And stay tuned for our next video, a story about a small village that turned its back on a forgotten woman until the day the world returned for her. You will not want to miss it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And thank you for believing, like I do, that stories have the power to change lives. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, the people who matter most are not waiting for your success. They are waiting for you.